Who was King Henry III of England, and what was significant about his reign? Let's find out in today's episode of the History Chronicles. Today's History Chronicle begins at Runnymede in Surrey in the south of England on the 15th day of June 1215. That day, King John I of England agreed to the terms of a document called the Magna Carta. John was at war with a large number of his nobles and agreed to the Magna Carta to try to quell the unrest. The document, which literally means the Great Charter, promised that the king would respect the rights of his nobles, provide them with fair justice before the courts, and not tax them exorbitantly. John was dead just over a year later, but the conflict between the English crown and the nobility of the country of which the Magna Carta was symptomatic would drag on through the long reign of his son, King Henry III. Henry was born on the 1st of October 1207 at Winchester Castle in England. Little is known of his early life, other than that in the early 1210s his education was placed in the hands of Peter de Roche, an individual who would play a significant part in Henry's life for the next 25 years. Through de Roche and others, he was taught about what would be expected of him as a King of England. It was during his youth that Henry developed his unusual piety, and he remained a deeply religious man throughout his life, one who held the saints in high regard. Henry's reign as King of England would be profoundly shaped by the legacy his father left him. John was not a successful king. Before he had ever acquired the crown, he had conspired with the French against his brother King Richard I while he was on crusade in the Holy Land. Then, when he became King of England himself, John not only managed to alienate his own nobles profoundly by overtaxing them and disregarding their rights, but he also lost a huge proportion of England's territories in northern France in a catastrophic military collapse in 1204, most notably the Duchy of Normandy. Thereafter, England only retained its provinces in western France around Gascony and the surrounding region. King John died in October 1216 having contracted dysentery. When he did, Henry, his eldest son, was just turning 9 years of age. It would be many years before he would be able to rule on his own, and as a result, his early years as king were dominated by regency governments in which some of the leading nobles of England governed for him. In 1216, this was William Marshal, the Earl of Pembroke. Marshal stabilised the realm during his first years of Henry's young reign, as John had died, still at war with his own nobility. By agreeing to honour the terms of the Magna Carta, Marshal was able to bring the First Barons' War, as the conflict John had engaged in with his nobles was known, to an end in 1217. William Marshal died in 1219. He was succeeded in his duties as regent for Henry by Hubert de Burgh. De Burgh would occupy the office of justiciar in England throughout the 1220s and eventually came to dominate the Henrician government. Initially, this was as regent, and few people objected, but as Henry himself entered his adult years and de Burgh still seemed to be running affairs, many queried why the king did not take control himself. Eventually, de Burgh was removed in 1232, but this simply ushered in a new period of domination of the government by a faction led by Henry's former tutor, Peter de Roche. It was not until 1234, when he was already in his late 20s, that Henry finally dismantled de Roche's faction and began to rule for himself. It was also at this time that he gave his concerted attention to securing the succession, and in January 1236 he married Eleanor of Provence. They would eventually have 5 children. The eldest, a boy called Edward, was born in 1239, and he would play a critical role in Henry's reign from the late 1250s onwards. A second son, Edmund, arrived in 1245, while 3 daughters, Margaret, Beatrice and Catherine, were born in 1240, 1242 and 1253 respectively, although Catherine was ill from birth and died when she was just 3 years old. In the first half of his reign, Henry negotiated a highly significant treaty with King Alexander II of Scotland, his brother-in-law through Alexander's marriage to Henry's sister, Joan. By the terms of the Treaty of York, which the pair agreed in September 1237, Alexander relinquished any Scottish claims to Northumberland, Cumberland and Westmoreland in northern England. Thereafter, the relationship between England and Scotland remained very peaceful throughout Henry's long reign, and the Treaty of York has of special importance in Anglo-Scottish history in that the border which was established at York in 1237 has largely been maintained down to the present day. Henry's reign saw mixed success to the west of England in Wales and Ireland. The Crown had largely lost control of Wales during the crises of John's reign, and Henry was unable to re-establish control. Many military campaigns were undertaken there, but the princes of Gwynedd retained control over much of the country throughout the 13th century. Conversely, in Ireland, where Henry's grandfather, Henry II, had allowed a number of Cambro-Norman knights to carve out personal lordships in the late 12th century, English arms continued to prosper, and individuals such as the Baron of Desmond, John Fitz-Thomas, conquered much of the southern province of Munster from the Irish at this time. Yet it was France which remained the overwhelming concern for many of Henry's nobility. They wanted to see a reconquest of the territories John had lost in 1204, but they were to be very much disappointed in this. In 1242, Henry led an army to France to aid the barons of Poitou, one of whom, Hugh of Lusignan, had married Henry's widowed mother. The brief Cent Ans War which followed was a military debacle for the English, and King Louis IX of France tightened his control over Poitou in the aftermath of it. Moreover, many of Henry's Lusignan relatives and their allies sought refuge in England afterwards, and the perceived influence of the Poitevins over Henry's court further alienated the English nobles. It was not all failure, however. One of the most striking features of Henry's reign was his patronage of the arts, particularly religious architecture. He provided extensive funding to the religious orders to erect new abbeys and churches, while he personally oversaw the redevelopment of Westminster Abbey. This was undertaken during a period of 4 decades across his reign, and the visitor to the Abbey in London today is confronted to a substantial degree with the work Henry initiated here. Henry also developed policies towards the Jewish community of England, which seem intolerant today, but which were well intended by the king. A substantial number of Jewish people had settled in England since the mid-11th century. They faced persecution during the 12th century on account of being perceived as having too much influence over money lending in England. Henry tried to reform the terms by which they could loan money and also encouraged England's Jews to convert to Christianity. These policies, however, could not prevent periodic bouts of violence against the Jewish people of England, and in 1290 Henry's successor, Edward I, actually expelled the Jewish community entirely from England. In the 1250s, Henry embarked on an enterprise which would create further problems for him. Beginning in the 11th century, the Normans had conquered southern Italy, ruled it as the Kingdom of Sicily. Eventually, this passed to the Hohenstaufen family of Germany, whose rulers also dominated the Holy Roman Empire. But they had clashed with the papacy for decades, and when the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II died in 1250, Rome proposed to Henry that he install his younger son Edmund as King of Sicily. This Henry attempted, and raised large taxes at home to try to support Edmund's cause in the mid-1250s. But despite his best efforts, Manfred of the House of Hohenstaufen eventually claimed the throne of Sicily. Henry succeeded only in alienating his subjects through heavy taxation. The Sicily enterprise was just one issue which created a new political crisis in England in 1258. At that time, a group of nobles led by Simon de Montfort began agitating for reform. They managed to enforce Henry to accept the provisions of Oxford that year, whereby they would select a group of magnates to act as his ministers and officials, giving them large amounts of control over the government and its finances. Further provisions agreed at Westminster the following year attempted to essentially establish rule by the magnates, in which Henry would be nothing more than a figurehead. But Henry would not accept this, and was determined to fight back. Following the provisions of Westminster, Henry headed to France, where he reached an agreement with King Louis there, that he would permanently renounce his claims to Normandy and the other territories John had lost in 1204, if Louis agreed to provide him with support in his ongoing clash with his own nobility. This done, Henry headed back to England and seized control of the government back from his nobles. Simon de Montfort was expelled to France, but it was not long before he returned in the spring of 1263 and began organising a new rebellion against Henry. When Louis was asked to adjudicate on matters and, predictably, sided with Henry, the nobles decided to engage in civil war. The Second Barons' War, as the conflict became known, lasted from 1264 to 1267. However, the crucial period was in 1264 and 1265. First at the Battle of Lewes in May 1264, Simon de Montfort and his allies won a major victory over Henry, his son Edward, and their allies. Henry and Edward were captured and were forced to effectively let de Montfort and the barons rule England going forward. But a year later, Edward escaped, raised a new army, and defeated de Montfort at the Battle of Evesham in August 1265. De Montfort was killed in combat at this battle, and Henry was set free afterwards. He now seized power back, and in the year and a half that followed, crushed the rest of the rebels. The end of the Second Barons' War ushered in the final years of Henry's reign. There was some limited stabilisation of the realm. A treaty was reached with Llewellyn of Gwynedd, through which he was acknowledged in his territories, but agreed to pay a nominal allegiance to Henry. Henry was also particularly glad to see the building work at Westminster Abbey largely brought to a conclusion after 30 years. Meanwhile, Prince Edward determined to head on crusade to the Holy Land. When he bid his father goodbye before he left, it was the last time they would see each other. Henry died on the 16th of November 1272. He was entombed at Westminster and was succeeded by Edward. Henry III can hardly be said to have been one of England's great kings, but he was not a striking failure like his father John. Rather, he was a peaceful, religious man who inherited a kingdom which was mired in conflict when he ascended to the throne. Certainly his mismanagement of the kingdom's finances added to the instability, but a great many of the other problems which occurred during his reign were beyond his control, notably the difficult situation in France and the volatility of his nobles. Perhaps his greatest success was that by the end of his reign, things had stabilised enough that his son was able to once again make England a great European power during his own lengthy reign. You've been watching the History Chronicles. We'd love to know what you think of King Henry III. Please let us know below, and if you enjoyed our video, please give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Also, if you'd like to support our work going forward, please visit our Patreon page, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the History Chronicles.